So when I'm not talking about why the classic Thomas seasons are so great, or why Edward and Gordon are the best characters in the series, or bashing Bubba and Mattel for their atrocious franchising ruining decisions, or mapping out the entire geography of the TV series Island of Sodor, I work on model trains. I swear, I have a life, guys. I have been and still am endlessly inspired by the numerous modelers in the Thomas fandom. All the takes on characters in model form, whether they're Railway series inspired, complete 100% accurate prop replicas, or from a complete alternate universe of Sodor, I never stop being inspired by the work I see from this fandom. And finally, in December 2019, I took the leap and started modeling of my own. Since then, I have been slowly building up my own 00 gauge fleet of Northwestern Railway engines. What these are realistic takes on Thomas characters, drawing mostly from how they are visually portrayed in the original Railway series. It's not strictly just Railway series characters here, I've added a couple TV series ones too, with a twist. So what I'd like to do today is give you all a rundown of every engine so far in this collection, all in the order of which they were made. So let's dive in. Edward. Naturally, Edward was the first engine I really wanted to make, and was what really kicked off this whole thing. I did a Photoshop back in early 2019 of a Hornby D16 in Edward's livery, and since then, it never left my head. Eventually, I finally caved in and purchased one. So Edward is the first model that I fully completed, and is also the most inaccurate of all the engines in the fleet. Obviously, Edward wasn't a D16, but sadly there's not a lot of options for ready-to-run 440s in 00 gauge. I chose the D16 specifically for its height, its large amount of space between the boiler and footplate, and the lack of a Belpaire firebox, and the NER-styled cab. The tender is from a Bachmann N class, and the funnel is a white metal cast of a Great Western Halls. What I really want to do is make videos showcasing the whole building process for each of these engines. So when I make one for Edward, I'll go further into detail about the painting process and what a nightmare it was to rewire the pickups in the tender. While I would like to redo Edward someday to make him more accurate to the illustrations, I really can't deny that this is my favorite model that I've made, as it was the first one that I worked on. And also because, you know, it's Edward. Percy. My Percy is a real kit bash. The body is a 3D print from Shapeways simply called GWR Shunter by JH5000. The reason I went with this one over Sparkshot's Green Goblin body, which is what everyone usually uses, is that I just like the proportions of this one much more. This looks a lot more like John Kenny's take on Percy, which is my favorite incarnation of Percy, like, ever. The body was built to fit on a Hornby Pug chassis. Luckily, Hornby had just re-released their Pug when I started this, so I was able to get a brand new one pretty easily. I swapped the wheels with Peckett ones and slipped the original side rods on top of them, and somehow it worked. He's not the smoothest runner in my fleet, and I would love to clean him up a bit more in the future, but I'm really happy with how he turned out. Thomas. Thomas is another favorite of mine. This was made using Sparkshot's Baby E2 body on a Dapple Terrier chassis. While this was built for a Bachmann Thomas chassis, I ended up using a Terrier one for it. Thomas is one I absolutely will do a whole video for, as this guy has quite a long story coming to be. The story involves a full-size E2 body, some photoshops, and a broken Terrier. Lots to cover there, so I will go more into detail about Thomas in a full video at a later date. Henry. Henry was made using a Hornby LMS Black 5. He was one of the easiest to model and also one of the most tedious. He was easy because I had to do no mods at all to it. Henry is just straight up a Black 5. However, his paint job was super complex because the Hornby Black 5 has so many little tiny details that you have to paint around or repaint if you happen to drop paint on them. I used an early Black 5 for Henry, which is technically inaccurate to the illustrations because it lacks a top feed. My justification is that Henry was sent to crew and rebuilt in 1935 according to the iOS book, and during that time the Black 5s wouldn't have had top feeds, even though the illustrations show it. Either way, I'm really happy with how Henry turned out. Black 5s are such lookers, especially in green. Duck. Duck should have been an easy one to make, but yet was kinda difficult. I'll go more into detail when I make a video about this model, but basically the gist is I couldn't find the exact Great Western 5700 pannier with the correct cab, so I ended up having to use the body of an old mainline 5700 fitted to a modern Bachmann 5700 chassis. Overall, I'm really happy with how Duck turned out, and I super adore the brighter, mintier shade of green that I put him in, which is far more accurate to the book illustrations. Real Great Western green is really just kinda drab in my opinion. Spencer. Spencer is one of my favorite TV characters in Thomas, and I knew I had to make a model of him one day. This was a fairly simple mod. He's a Hornby Silver Jubilee A4 with the valances cut off to match his look in the TV show more. I have a whole headcanon of how Spencer would have fit into the Railway series lore, and I'll dive into that in the full video of the model's construction. In that video, I'll explain his weird livery and the Bert Spencer nameplates. Salty. Speaking of TV series favorites, here's another. Salty. Salty is another character that I think fits into the Railway series lore pretty damn well. I was super excited to make a realistic Salty because it's a character I've never seen anyone try to tackle before. Salty was made using a Helgen Class 07. I bought a BR blue one and then painted all the blue parts red, and then I weathered him to hell and back. This is my first time making something look really oily and grimy, and for a first time, I'm pretty happy with the result. Easily another favorite model of mine. Gordon. Gordon is one I wanted to do since the beginning. I was dead set on using a Hornby Great Northern for him because I wanted Gordon to be strictly an A1 with no A3 modifications. But since I couldn't find a Hornby Great Northern for under $200, I kept pushing him off. Eventually I decided that Gordon probably would have been sent to get A3 mods at some point in his lifetime, so I settled on a Hornby Lattice for his body. I chose Lattice because he was one of the A3s Hornby made without the huge banjo dome. The tender is an LNER group standard one from a Bachmann B1. I thought a Fowler tender just looked too dinky behind Gordon, and I wanted one that matched his proportions. The group standard one was my first choice, and by God, it matches him perfectly. This is another favorite model of mine. It just turned out so well. Toby. Toby is the easiest model ever, because I barely had to do anything to customize him into the character. He's a Rapido J70 with barely any paint mods. I painted his side plates into Northwestern blue, and then his trim in a beige color to match how he looks in the illustrations. And that's it, that's all I did. For anyone who wants to get into Thomas modeling, but wants a simple engine to start with, I highly recommend that you start with Toby first. Don't be stupid like me and make your first model a modified D16 with a swapped tender that you have to completely rewire to make work. The Rapido J70 is a superb little model, and very little has to be done to make it into our favorite tram engine. James. James was the most difficult engine to accomplish in this whole collection, and that's why I pushed him off for so long. James is a 260 Mogul tender engine with inside motion, which is an incredibly rare thing on British steam engines. Audrey says that James is an LYR Class 28 with an extended front and bogie truck. And to be honest, I'm not a fan of the look. It's too skinny and tall for my liking. James always had a fat smokebox and boiler in the illustrations. Not that fat, but pretty fat. So what I ended up using was a Bachmann J11 with heavy modifications to the front footplate. I had to chop off the front, extend the front with wood and putty, and fit a rotating bogie underneath. It was extremely tedious work, but I managed to pull it off, and I'm so satisfied with it. Probably my most ambitious model in the collection, and definitely the most unique. I've never seen anyone use a J11 for James before. James will definitely get his own video showcasing the building process, and I'll go into full detail of just how I managed to pull that off. Arthur, another TV series favorite of mine. Arthur is a Bachmann Ivit 2MT painted up in lined LMS maroon, wearing the number he is seen wearing in his concept art. The number belongs to a real preserved 2MT, and my headcanon is that Arthur is that engine. I have a whole headcanon and backstory for Arthur, all of which I will go into in the video I make on him. Oliver. Oliver, like Toby, is another mod that is extremely simple. He's a Hornby 1400 auto tank repainted into the same brighter minty green like Duck. I desperately wanted to use a DJ Models auto tank for him since the detail on that thing is impeccable, but DJ Models went bankrupt last year, and the prices for their auto tanks have shot up severely. I'm sorry, but no way in hell am I paying $300 to make Oliver, so I settled for a Hornby one. Stepney. Stepney's the only one here that is still incomplete, as I still haven't quite figured out how to tackle his name decals. Stepney is made from a Hornby A1X Terrier, specifically Brighton Works, with the name and number removed using rubbing alcohol. I made new 55 number plates and painted his coal bunker black. It's a super simple mod, but still sadly unfinished. One day, Stepney, one day, I'll finish you. Annie and Clarabelle. Annie and Clarabelle are the only pieces of rolling stock I've completed at the moment. They were made from Ratio Midland Bogey Coach kits. Annie and Clarabelle are push-pull coaches in the Railway series, hence why we see Thomas with red tail lamps in some of the illustrations. Because he's pushing the train backwards, Clarabelle needs her rear windows for the driver to see. I cut those windows out on Clarabelle's rear end with an X-Acto knife, and then put plastic sheets in for window glass. These were my first ever 00 gauge kits, and I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. For anyone that's worried about building kits, trust me, they are not as intimidating as they look. So that's the collection so far, folks. It will continue to grow as time goes on. There's a bunch of characters that I want to add to this fleet. Mavis is one of the top priorities at the moment, but I cannot for the life of me find a Bachmann 04 for a decent price. Donald and Douglas I will absolutely do once the Bachmann Caledonian 812s come out this year. I also really want to do Daisy, Boko, Bear, Paxton, and my own take on Barry, the rescue engine, eventually. Like I said, I will be uploading more in-depth videos on the construction process for most of the engines here, so look out for those. See y'all next time.